Welcome to the SIWIKE Podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The SIWIKE Podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier podcast. We're here with one of our guest hosts, David Jorjani, and hopefully I didn't butcher the name too much, but he comes to us with a background in product, in tech, and in teaching as well. So he also has a lot of experience in the entrepreneurial world, but I'll let him kind of dive deep and tell us a little bit about what he's doing now.
Luki, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me. And as you mentioned, my name is David Jorjani. I am currently a director of product at ideal.com, which is a small startup, 30-something people, not that small, not that big, and kind of heading the product management side. For those who don't know, product management is about kind of understanding what the engineering team needs to focus on, what the engineering team needs to build, and then prioritization, kind of helping them clarify what needs to be done, and helping them kind of walk the path and deliver. So that's one side of it. There's a lot more to it. I'm happy to open up if needed. And the other side is I'm also teaching at the University of Toronto. I teach a course, CSE 301, which is Introduction to Software Engineering, to computer science students who are interested in learning software engineering to be able to get internships and jobs. And I also teach another course in data storytelling, which I want to help technical and non-technical people read data, understand it, and be able to present it to others to take action. So I'll pause there given the brief introduction, and happy to expand on any one part that you want, Luki.
Yeah, I actually want to go back in time and delve into what was David like as a kid. So getting from that point to where he is now. So what was he like an adventurous kid, an outgoing kid? Was he very technical minded? But what was David like as a kid? What are some of the earliest fond memories that you might have?
I remember being very excited about computers in general. I was nerdy. I was, for better or for worse, I was categorized as talented. I went to the gifted school, and it had implications that after years and years of being in the world, I'm learning that it had the good side and it had the bad sides, and I'm happy to open that part as well. But I think being part of the school of a lot of kids who are very nerdy and the same kind of mindset was something that I remember, and I'm happy about the experiences there. I played a lot with computer games, maybe too much. That's one of the things that every now and then I go back. But I enjoyed those times, playing those with my friends or going to like an internet cafe to play together. That was middle school and high school for me. And
no, go ahead.
I was gonna say that essentially defined a good chunk of my childhood, playing video games. The first time was around like when I was 4 years old. I'm not too proud of it, but again, just one of the biggest things that I remember.
I wanted to delve a little bit into what you mentioned about kind of the good and the bad of that gifted part, because a lot of parents would love if their kids are gifted. So I actually was a gifted student as well, and my kid just recently went through the test, and unfortunately he didn't make the cut. Right, but I think that might be a blessing in disguise. So can you walk us through a little bit about your experience and say, well, that good part, and then maybe the opposite side of the bad, just so that folks understand what that means.
Right. So actually, this is a great question. The good part is obviously I was kind of being valued. So I had confidence from early on. I was being told, you're smart, you're smart, you're smart. And it held my confidence as a kid. It helped me believe in having dreams and potential and all those things. However, it also made me define myself by intelligence and define people's values by intelligence, right? As a young kid, I didn't know much, right? So young kids generally are defined by money or popularity, or for us, intelligence. I was among the nerdy group, right? So for us, intelligence was the biggest thing, much bigger than popularity. I guess different schools and different kids would have different mindsets. So it kind of made me, or like got me to define intelligence as one of the key things that a person has, and became my value system. And now being an adult and having gone through this and having thought through leadership and kind of understanding other aspects of people, I'm like, actually come to think of it, intelligence or IQ, like the raw intelligence, almost means nothing. I mean, I'm grateful that I'm a little bit sharper in terms of being able to things, but it actually means nothing, especially when it comes to communicating with others and working with other people. And we're hearing a lot about emotional intelligence, right? empathy. And those are the things that I didn't get to practice as a kid. And I think those would be very, very valuable.
Yeah, I think I would echo that sentiment where a lot of the kind of new jobs, especially things like product and marketing and things like that, it deals with how you understand people, right? The other stuff
Exactly.
is a commodity, right? Right. They'll build an app or machine learning to deal with that because there's an if this then that statement, but like creativity or dealing with emotions, that stuff is the
Mhm.
challenging part. So I'd love if you talked a little bit more about games, just kind of in that area where you mentioned, well, you spent a little too much time on that, but there's things like esports that are upcoming where a lot of people like, you know what, I can actually make a career out of that. Like, did you
Mhm.
ever kind of think of that? You probably weren't in that headspace, but what are those gaming days like? And was there like a game of choice?
I loved RPG games,
Okay.
role-playing games. So where I have the main character, you have a hero, you make decisions, or strategic games where you have to think through like a bigger picture, plan things ahead, right? So I played a lot of strategic games and RPG games. Um, and that was kind of a lot of time spent. The good thing about that is it helped me learn English and practice English because English
Okay.
was my fourth language, and I didn't know how to speak English, and I didn't speak English up until I was 20 something, right? So it helped me to kind of understand the words, understand the stories, and things like that. Um, so that was a big positive for me that I was getting from it.
So it sounded like games is more on later in life.
Games for me was 4 or 5 years old.
Okay.
Starting then, basic games at the time, but 7, 8 years up until like 18. And even now, these days, well, not these days, the past few years, I've had like times when I install the game, play the whole weekend, and then uninstall it again. Because again, I have this love for games and challenging games and strategic games that I still have a habit of playing. Not this year in 2021, maybe not in 2020, but I know it has happened in my 20s as well.
Cool. Well, I'm surprised because this is the time where a lot of people have opportunity to do stuff like catch up on Netflix and video games and stuff like that. But I guess there's other priorities at the moment. I'd love if you kind of walked us through kind of the journey. So you're a smart kid, right? You love video games, and you're on that path to go to high school and university, and you have to pick a career path. So what was kind of was there one destined for you, like the typical like doctor, lawyer, accountant, engineer? Was that in the path, or did you have influences from parents or cousins or siblings that kind of directed you to certain other paths?
That's a good question. So actually, my dad is a civil engineer.
Hmm.
My older brother is a civil engineer,
Okay.
and my sister is an architect.
Okay.
Mostly because I grew up in Iran, and in Iran at the time, girls couldn't study civil engineering.
Okay.
So the equivalent was, or there were some exceptions, but for the most part, my sister ended up going to architecture. So engineering was, or civil engineering very specifically, was kind of the carved path for me.
Right.
But I decided to rebel and then not go to the path that my parents my dad went through. And but I didn't know there could be so many other professions or majors that I could get into. So engineering was my world. I didn't want to become a civil engineer. I love computers, and IT or software ended up being my thing. I chose to go to those. I chose to apply to those programs, and I got into an IT engineering program at University in Iran.
And talk to us about that choice. So you basically crossed out civil as the engineering,
Mhm.
but there's still a lot of other engineerings that you could have done.
Yeah.
Was it just because of the love of tech and computers and stuff like that, or was there other factors that went into the decision making?
That's actually a great question. Ties into what we talked about earlier. With I'm going to give a bit of a background.
Okay.
I grew up in Iran, and in Iran, similar to India and I think China, you have an entrance exam. Like your high
Mhm.
school students take an entrance exam, and then with that entrance exam and the ranking, in Iran, we can choose which university we want to get into and which program we want to get into.
Okay.
Right. So with that, I did the entrance exam. I ranked well, which meant I could choose any of the options that I had. So for me, the biggest thing was future opportunity. And at the time, I knew that I would be coming to Canada. This is all high school back in there,
Hmm.
back in that time. I know we were wanting to come to Canada, and I was thinking, okay, what are the roles that could translate, or what I could learn in Iran and then come to Canada with, right? And with that mindset, software and IT were one of the kind of like top skills to pick up at the time. And I loved aerospace engineering as well, the
Okay.
idea. But given the context, if I learned aerospace engineering in Iran, given all the political and economical dynamics, it wouldn't have been a great opportunity for me in the West, right?
Okay.
So I chose to go into the world of computers and IT, mostly because I knew I would be able to immigrate to Canada easily and find a footing here.
And you did your schooling in Canada afterwards, right? So was that kind of the plan? So you did your undergrad with the sole purpose that, hey, it was going to be Canada, and I guess you picked Toronto specifically. So was there something about Toronto that kind of was interesting for you?
Yes, definitely. So to answer your earlier question, I did my undergrad in Iran and I did my master's degree in Canada.
Mhm.
And I chose specifically Toronto because I knew I would be an immigrant wherever I go. That was an obvious thing, right? So by definition. So I wanted to go a place where immigrants are welcome. And thinking about the other options, Europe, I even did an internship in Singapore.
Okay.
I could have gone there as an option, or the US. And Toronto ended up being my choice because I knew it's a very it was, and it is, a multicultural city. It did, and it still does, welcome immigrants and newcomers. And it is large enough that I can grow as much as I want to, because ambition and drive was another thing that I had in mind at the time. Vancouver was another option, again, being in Canada. And I decided not to go to Vancouver, one, because it was so far away from the Middle East where I am, and two, Vancouver, I thought was a smaller city than Toronto, and obviously less opportunities. I think that still holds, but I don't know how how true that is today, though.
Were there any kind of familial ties or factors? Like, did any of your other siblings end up in Canada, or do you have relatives in there, or is it purely based on those decisions?
At the time of decision making, I did not have any ties or anybody. I did not know that I did have. When I came here, when I was landing in the airport, or like days before, I realized that, yeah, I have a second or third cousin here, which I got in touch to. But when I was making the decision, I didn't know I could have family here.
Yeah, because sometimes that's a big decision factor where, well, I have an uncle there, so therefore we will move there. It'll help with some of the connectivity points. But if there's no one, it's nice to know that a second or third cousin, twice removed or whatever is there and available. So talk us a little bit about the experience immigrating to Canada, and you're a master's student. And at that point, were you fairly fluent in English? Because you mentioned that you learned a lot of it by playing RPG games. So had you played enough games that you became fluent, or what was that experience like?
So I did, before I come to Canada, I did an internship in Singapore.
Okay.
I did an internship there for 3 years, and they speak English, just a variation of English. But it is English. I practiced there. I worked with an American university and a research lab that kind of like was run by the faculty of the American University, University of Illinois. And I got to practice a little bit there. That was my first exposure to actually living in a country where English is the main language. So I got there, I got some experience, learned, I worked in an academic setting there. And then when I came to Canada, I could speak, I could communicate, but I didn't have the local kind of way of speaking, right? So in Canada, I think we say like, no worries, for example, or how's it going, and things like that. And it may not necessarily be everywhere. Simple expressions that we say and we use that may be strange to someone who's from Britain or like from Singapore or some other places, right? So those were the things that I picked up early on, but for the most part, I could communicate. And I've learned that initially I thought communication means I understand what you're saying, I understand your words, and I understand the full meaning of the sentence, and you understand what I'm saying and my words and my sentences, but communication is a lot more than just the words and the sentences, right? So that's another thing that I learned over the years, that just knowing the language is not enough to say I can communicate well in English or French or any other language.
Right. It goes to your point that sometimes these local colloquialisms or whatever can mean something totally different in different contexts. Do you have any specific ones that you have maybe a story about that you learned that was maybe unexpected?
Well, I think it took me a while to learn how to answer how's it going. Like
Okay.
I initially it was like hello, how are you? That's what I learned in school. That's what I learned like in the books and everything, right? I didn't but then the question, simple question of how's it going? Like how do you answer? Is it a genuine question? Like what is going? Like it took me a while to understand that very, very simple question. And a lot of times it's not even a question. It's just like it's a part of the extension of hello and hi, right?
Yeah.
So it was funny. I had to think through that, dig through it. I don't know how I answered them, but it was a challenge early on. But then I learned.
Yeah, I think that's when you get a little bit more comfortable, you laugh. But I probably at the time it was kind of like, "Oh, what does he mean? How's it going? Going what? Who going where? Like all that sort of stuff.
Exactly.
Cool. So your master's program and enjoying things, and then you're about to graduate. Did you have any aspirations for like more school or continuing on, or what was the thought process afterwards?
So I'm going to give a little more context. This might be new to a lot of the listeners, but I was an international student. I didn't have permanent residence or citizenship in Canada. I was an international student coming here, and Iran, similar to some other countries like Israel and Singapore and a few other ones, has a mandatory military service. So as a male, for me, an Iranian, I had to go back to Iran after finishing my studies. I didn't want to do that. Again, I'm not going to get into that right now, but so I had the requirement of finding a reason to stay in Canada legitimately, and also kind of not going back to Iran to do military service. And the combination of the two meant that I want to get my permanent residence as soon as possible, right? And one of the ways that I found at the time, looking at all the laws and everything, was that I could apply through a provincial nominee program.
Okay.
Ontario's provincial nominee program, which allowed me to kind of, if I have a job after graduating from a master's program, I could get into the path of getting my permanent residence. So that was kind of the driving decision: have enough income and get my provincial nominee program nomination, and then go through the permanent residency application process. So what did I need for that? I needed to have a job offer. So what did I do? Like as soon as possible, like I started searching for a job for the summer in September of the year before. I went through the interview process. I got an offer from a consulting firm in October for starting in the summer. Right. So now I have the offer in my hand. I'm like, when can I start my application process for the permanent residency? And I started my process in March. So way before I even start my my work, I went through the process of actually using that to go through the process. And then that became my job, and went through the whole process after that. Stayed there for a year and got my permanent residency. And that was kind of like one of the main criteria for my next steps in Canada.
Yeah, I think that's a good point where a lot of folks think that when they're graduating, let's say in April and June, let's start applying in April or June, right? Whereas oftentimes like consulting companies specifically will hire like the September before, and more companies are applying kind of earlier and earlier, where it's January, it's November, it's August, and sometimes a full 12 months before. So for anyone graduating, just be aware that you want to start thinking a little bit early for those types of things. So now that you have a job, so walk us through kind of the work career and some of the interesting milestones along the way.
I got started in June, and it was a technology consulting job. And as part of the role, we had to go through training.
Okay.
And we did 2 weeks of training in Atlanta, Georgia. I could have gone to Chicago for more training and India for more training, but I got a project right after, and I was sent to do the project. Because obviously consulting firms, the expectation is that you learn so it can be built.
Yep.
Build meaning they can charge the customer for your time. And for me, it happened right after, very soon. I got a project there, and then a few weeks after, I got another project, and I was put on another project for about 8 months. So that became my kind of next 8 months. I learned on the job. It was helpful, good, but I didn't enjoy the process as much. Again, comparison of technology consulting, slow process that we had to go through.
So what was the progression there? So you were not so happy with this current role, and did you have to stay there as part of your like visa and application requirements, that sort of thing, or were you starting to look afterwards? Or
No, so good question. What happened is that when you're out of a job, you hear things, and when you get into a job, you hear different things, right?
yeah,
So it's an experience that I had first time after graduation. I had heard that consulting would be challenging, demanding, and involving travel and things like that.
sure.
So that was a lot of learning. So that was the expectation that I went into consulting with, and not knowing that in the world that I was in technology consulting, it would depend on where your customer is.
Sure.
In my case, my customer was downtown Toronto. So obviously I don't need to travel other than maybe taking the TTC to get to the customer location, right? And because we're doing technology consulting, the projects are long. So being long, it means that I'm not going to be changing my customer or my project very, very often, right? So that was another thing. And I went into that. I thought I would be applying a lot of my knowledge in my experience in technology and software, but being enterprise software, and I was the user of that enterprise software, I was using very limited part of my knowledge base, right? So these are the things that kind of encouraged me to start exploring other options. And I had heard startups are a great place to learn, to grow, find challenges and things like that.
Right.
And I was looking for a startup to join. At the time, I was looking for a founder to join as a co-founder, right? So somebody who has an idea, somebody who's early stages of building a company and is looking for someone technical to help them build that product and build that company. So that search obviously took a while, and I found it. I found someone that I would start talking to a little bit more, getting to know him, the business, the product, what the intention was, what the vision was. And after months and months of talking, I decided to join him in the next June. So just 1 year after joining the consulting firm, I moved on to work on the startup.
And did you have any requirements in terms of, some people have like 2 years for their work permits and their visa and the PR and stuff like that, or this program is like, no, you could cut ties at pretty much whenever you wanted?
So luckily for me, my employment agreement was a standard employment, meaning that I don't have any minimum amount required to stay with the company. And luckily for me, because I had started my process earlier, I could finish early and I could my permanent residency early.
Okay.
So I didn't have none of those limits to move on to another company, especially a startup, because startups are less established and they can provide less kind of legal and financial support in that sense.
Sure. And so walk us through that startup as you're getting that learning that's supposedly promised to you in startups and stuff. Is that what you got? And did that meet expectations, or is it kind of like, oh, people talk and none of it's right?
So one thing that I've learned at the time, I didn't know. One thing that I've learned right now is that startups by nature are very much dependent on the framework, the mindset of the founders, right? So how the founders think, how they perceive, and what their goals are, and everything is founder driven in early stage startups, right? Now I've worked with so many founders in the past several years that I know now, but at the time I was mostly focused on, does this industry make sense? Does it excite me? And the answer was yes. It was in financial technology, fintech, and I love fintech. I want to get into finance, and I did, and I learned a ton. And will I be building code and writing code? And the answer was yes. I was building like a very, very complex product that I even didn't know what I'm building, because it was very specialized, and our founder knew about it, and he would kind of like come in and coach me step by step. right? So that's another thing. Again, our founder wasn't a teacher, wasn't a mentor. He helped me do the things the way he thought would make sense, and I did them that way. I learned to code, I learned the market that way, but um, it took me a while to learn to think about the process, right? So the coaching and the mentoring of who your manager is very, very valuable and important. And that's a lesson that I didn't know at the time. Now, if I were to choose a company, the first thing I would look at before even salary or industry or anything else, I will be looking at who my manager is, who my leader is, and how they think and what they think. So that's actually one of the things that I wish I know earlier.
So what are some of the things that you would look out for in the future? So the things that you didn't recognize at the time, but what are some key important things for you? And everybody's going to be slightly different, but what are some of the key things that kind of tipped you off? Like, yeah, next time I really got to make sure that this person, my manager, is going to be like this.
I would say, first of all, I need to know myself. For me, I know my values. I know what my priorities are, right? I know where I want to put my focus on. And when I know which path I want to be going on, I want to make sure that the environment that I go into and the leader that I kind of follow aligns with that as well. So we're kind of like working on the same path. And that's something that I would kind of keep an eye out. So what is his or her dream that I'm going to be part of? What is his or way of thinking? Or I'm going to say, are they a good coach or a mentor? Are they growing themselves? Do they have an open mind? Are they trusting? And a lot of those things that would allow me to achieve the things that I want, right? While I'm helping them achieve their goals. So kind of building that mutually beneficial relationship.
Sounds good. And then the next stage, well, I think spoiler alert, you decide to do something on your own, because I guess you didn't find that where you were. Was that the case, or was there just another reason for you to start something on your own?
So I was at the company Cooltra for 4 years. And in the world of technology, that's a lot of time.
Sure.
When I was there for 4 years, built the first product, hired a bunch of people, built the dev team. And towards the end of the 4 years, we started a VP of engineering. So someone to take over the engineering side, someone who had a lot of background and experience. And he came on, I kind of like handed over, onboarded him on how everything on the engineering side works of the team, and he became the leader of the team. And I realized, or I kind of knew that it was time for me to move on, mostly because I wanted to kind of experience a new challenge. I didn't want to kind of be focused on a one specific tech stack for too long as my first main kind of technology experience, right? Like my main kind of professional experience, if that makes sense. So I was looking for something else and found this kind of next idea to work on, which I think is a very valuable business idea. I worked on it for about a year, but unfortunately, I realized another lesson that I had learned, that I had read a lot about. Everybody in startups talks about it, but I didn't value it as much. But having gone through the experience, I can share now. Having passion for the problem you're solving.
Right.
I was an analytical person. I'm an engineer. Like passion is not something that I use all the time, except for hearing in the startup kind of scenes and investors and VCs talk about it all the time.
Right.
But in a startup world, when you're starting, it's very demanding. It is very challenging. It is not rewarding because startup founders are building a system.
Right.
And building a system, a company, and a product takes time. And it was an extremely delayed gratification. And if I don't have passion, I'm going to be challenging and questioning my decisions every single day, and that's going to be draining. So now if I were to start something else, I would ask myself, do I care about the customer and the product? Do I find it exciting? And can I live working on it for 5, 10, 20 years, however long it takes to actually achieve success? And that will be one of the things that I would be asking myself.
Cool. And then, well, even before that time, you started teaching as well. So how did that kind of branch of your career path happen? So I think that this happened before you started your own company.
Yeah. So again, towards second or third year of working at Cooltra, the startup that I had joined, I was interviewing candidates for software engineering roles. And I was a U of T grad, and I wanted U of T graduates, again, kind of like a little bit of a university kind of ego, I guess might be a word for it. I wanted to make sure that U of T students are good in the eyes of the hiring managers. They want to hire them to bring on. And the challenge was the University of Toronto students, compared to some other universities, which I'm not going to name, have less hands-on experience.
Right.
Less professional experience when it comes to building software, and that becomes a barrier for them finding even an internship or a full-time job. And I want to go back to teaching to help them kind of bypass the barrier and have the first footing and a good start in their education that will set them up for success when it comes to going for internships and full-time jobs. So that's why I went back to teaching and started teaching at the University of Toronto.
And was the course that you're teaching, because I know you do like projects with businesses outside and have students code it, was that the course and you just took it over, or did you integrate that into the course on your own because of this need to have folks have hands-on experience?
So at the time, it was more of there was a project, but the project was not the way that it is today. The project was, here's something that we tell you to build, and you're going to go build it, and there's a chance that no one's going to be using it afterwards.
Right.
So that was kind of like a very academic setting, if you will, right, where there's a kind of like a made up project, and students work towards that made up project. Mm-hmm. That was what I took over for the most part, and then as I started teaching and gained experience, I learned that so we can make this more meaningful for the students, because if it's a made up project and I just made it up because I want to give the students a project, they won't have a real customer to work with.
Sure.
They won't have a real project to work on and understand and clarify what needs to be done. So I started reaching out, as you mentioned, to nonprofits, research labs, startups, and different organizations that would have a small project that our students could work on, and kind of create that partnership program where they would propose projects and the students would choose which projects they want to work on.
Cool. So you're teaching, you've evolved this program, giving students kind of real world, closer to real world work experience, because now there's an actual client in there. And you're in that startup, then you start your own startup. And then what happens there to bring you to kind of your current place?
So I worked on the startup for about a year. I got into an incubator. It was, again, a great idea that I was working on. I had a partner, main founder of the business, who was in the same industry. And we started working together, building the product. We launched the product. And as we moved forward, I realized that, and we got early success. We got a grant, we got into the incubator, we were going for a patent on the project. And as we moved forward, I asked myself, I would, for a startup like this to succeed, we would need several years of undivided attention, both of us, and potentially with a larger team. And it would be a big commitment, much bigger than I had initially planned for or thought about. And I asked the question of, do I love the problem that I'm solving? Do I care so much about it? And the kinds of customers or the people that I'm working with and working on, and am I willing to put in 5 years of my life for the success of the company, or for the definition of success? So that became kind of a where do I put my time in as a main question, and the priority that I define for the startup. And for me, what I work on and what I spend my time on is highly valuable than just having a success as a title. Although we're on the right track and getting customers and all that, I decided to move on to where I am right now, actually.
Yeah. So walk us through that journey. So did you kind of say, hey, founder or co-founder, let's part ways, and are they continuing on that business, or did it kind of drop entirely? And then what was your path to kind of secure your current role?
So I had some difficult and honest conversations with the founder of the company at the time, and explained the situation. We talked about it, and we kind of acknowledged the differences that we also had. There's a little more than again disagreements on how we see things moving forward as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about that, and I told him that I'm happy to support, because I was the co-founder and CTO, owned a lot of the infrastructure and the product. I told him that I'm happy to kind of support him to as while he's looking for potentially another person or continue to work on the project. So that was our agreement. And as I was kind of having those conversations, kind of moving on, I started talking to people in my network to see what might be open. And one of the people that I had worked with at our first startup, Cultra, reached out and said, "Hey, David, I've joined this amazing startup, and I know we work together very well, and I know you, so come join us and work with us." And I said yes to that kind of invite. I talked to him, and then I talked to the co-founder of the business at the time, Sean, and this was almost 2 years ago now. And Sean, again, leader of the company, again, having learned lessons from before, leader of the company, was an amazing person. They had already a successful exit. And they had almost figured out at the time what the product is going to be, what the startup is going to do. So it checked the boxes for me, and I decided to join Ideal.com, which is the company that I'm part of right now. And well, the good news is 2 years later, we just got acquired a few weeks ago. In the startup lingo, it means essentially a success and an exit for the main founders and the early employees, and potentially more opportunities at a much bigger scale within a larger company.
Yeah, it sounds like a successful time, and you learn from your challenges and mistakes, and now you're on to potentially bigger and better things. So what's some, I guess, other SWIKE that you might want to impart on folks? And then if you want to share some of your future aspirations ongoing, then we'd love to hear those as well.
I think I mentioned earlier, which is choose their leader, and knowing I love the space that I'm in right now,
Okay.
right? HR tech, right? Working on projects that have meanings for me, right? One of the things that I spend a lot of my time on are conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion,
Okay.
and helping companies be more inclusive and diversifying their talent pool and giving everybody an equitable chance.
Right.
That's something that I'm personally passionate about and drives me more so than, again, just being a job. So they call about a job, a career, and a mission, and a calling, and things like that, right? So for me, all of them are lined up, and wherever I go, I think that would be something that would be a requirement for me. So far, I've had learning and challenges with the two things that I started with my first startup. The second was, again, having it lined up with my personal values. That would be a second thing. That now, again, I don't know, given the uncertainties of acquisition, to be perfectly honest, what's going to happen next. But I'm going to make sure that those are the things that I'm going to have in my role wherever I go.
That's amazing. And for those that hear birds chirping in the background, David's joining us from Costa Rica. So maybe there's going to be more travel or working abroad in your future as well. But yeah, thanks so much for joining us and sharing some of your insights, your SWIKE, and your journey. And we might have you back for other deep dives on a whole bunch of other things. I picked up a couple things. You mentioned the diversity and inclusion could be an interesting topic. Could be as an immigrant, a lot of the startup stuff, and even on product could be good as well. So would love to have you back if you're willing. And yeah, is there a place where folks can reach out to you, or is there any other parting words that you want to share with the audience?
Well, thank you for the time. It was a pleasure talking to you. I think LinkedIn might be the best way to connect if people are willing to. I'm happy to have conversations. Like I mentioned, I do teaching mostly because I want to help mostly software engineers and other young folks find their next steps. So happy to connect with people who are interested. My LinkedIn, I guess Luki can share, or
share that,
find me easily. Yeah, great.
Sounds good. So perfect, David. So thanks so much, and yeah, we'll hopefully have you back for a future episode.
Thank you, and have a good day.
Thanks for joining us on the SIWIKE Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Luki Danu, LUKIDANU, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.